Hey, thanks for jumping in and just getting back from the plate farm. Had an amazing workout and still a little high from my pre-workout, if you know what I'm talking about, but also for this episode because there is a bunch of what the fuck moments in it and I enjoy it a lot and I know you will as well. But I know I have a ton of new listeners and it makes me very happy. So thank you for jumping in and also the ones that have been supporting me since the beginning. Much love. You know that. You know I love you all. But got a handful of things before I get into this. Of course, Live Rishi. These guys make high-quality CBD product. And a quick little story. I got a buddy of mine that I work with quite a bit. And the other day he was saying that he's not sleeping very well. I said, shit, dude, I got a remedy for you. And he's a gym rat like me and lives a healthy lifestyle, so he doesn't like to do the prescription bullshit and all that kind of thing with sleeping pills or anything like that. So I gave him my favorite, the 1,000 milligram tincture. And he called me this morning and to thank me quite a bit profusely, if I pronounce that right, that he, over the last 2 nights, have slept better than he can remember, since he can remember. So check out liverishi.com. Use the code word TABLE50, and you're looking at 50% off your entire order. Showing you some love for showing me some love. So check that out, and they got a brand new website, and it looks amazing. But speaking of websites, my website, waltzkitchentable.com, would love for you to jump over there. Check out... been blogging. That's been a lot of fun. They're super short, and I'm about to put one up about poker because I love playing cards. And also, there's a page where I've been on other people's podcasts around the world, and it's been just a blast, man. I've been having so much fun with that. So show them a little bit of love, and right on the front page, if you want a little sunshine in your inbox once a month, sign up for my newsletter. Would love to have you there. All right, man, let's get to this. Welcome to Walt's Kitchen Table, where I feature captivating stories from fascinating people. Frank, this dude reached out to me, and as soon as I started trolling him, I loved him immediately. Never even talked to him, well, I eventually did. But just researching him, I was like, I got to talk to this dude. We set up a phone call, had a great phone call, got into the episode, and there is a bunch of what the fuck that I said, and I was like, holy man. He is just a fun dude to talk to. His life experiences are amazing. He's a full-time writer now and writes the kind of novels that I enjoy. Sorry, Frank, I haven't got into the years yet, but I will. So check these guys, or check it out. Links all in the show notes, regular stuff. You guys know the drill. And the story of him coming out of high school, getting in the military, and what he ended up doing, that was definitely what the fuck. But I'm going to let him tell you all about it. Let's get to it. Oh, here we go. All right, dude. So everything you say now is going to be on the internet.
Forever.
Well, as long as the internet's around. They said that about MySpace too, right?
That's true.
Dude, thanks again for coming on, reaching out. I checked out some of your stuff. Obviously, I trolled you a little bit, but we had a great conversation to start. And I thought some of your stuff was pretty cool. So retired cop, huh?
Yeah, for a while now. 2013.
How long were you a cop?
20 years and a day.
What? Where'd the day come from? Was that your going away party? You had to wait a day?
No, without getting too technical, there's some stuff that happens with your retirement at 20 years. You reach a different level of being vested. And so I wanted to make sure I was over 20 years. So I went that extra day just to be sure there was no question. I came on the 9th and left on the 10th or 8th and the 9th or something. I'd have to go back and look, but I made sure to break the 20-year mark just to be safe. Because it made a difference. I mean, I didn't draw my retirement for about 5 years. And during that 5 years, the cost of living adjustments that the retirement system got were applied to my retirement, my eventual draw. If I hadn't have made 20 years, it would have remained static. So it was worth it.
Oh, good. Jay, nice. Yeah, my first career, I was almost 20 years in the corporate world out west, and about 12 years in, I'm like, I don't care what happens. In 20 years, I'm leaving. And people are like, what are you going to do? I'm like, I don't care. Something opportunity is going to come up, and I'm leaving in 20 years. And at year 18, I got a good opportunity to go in business for myself. So, well, with a partner and stuff. But so I took that. But yeah, I get the retirement thing.
Well, it was kind of funny because I started when I was writing and everything from, I mean, all my life, but I was writing pretty seriously from about 2004. And so I always kind of thought, if I get to 20, it'd be nice to retire and work full time as a writer. And so I started doing things to be in a position to make that happen. Like I was maxing out my deferred comp and putting money away, and I was doing other things and put myself in a position to be able to do that, because you can't just decide to do it on 19 years and 364 days, right?
What?
And,
tomorrow it doesn't happen? Come on.
Yeah, you got to plan a little bit anyway, and get some lucky breaks along the way. But then near the end of my career, I had kind of a rough run with the new chief that came in there. I found him to be not such a great guy, and it got to the point where, for a variety of reasons, I looked at my wife and I just said, kind of like what you were just describing, why am I here? I have no upward influence. The chief isn't listening to me. He's a numbskull, and they're going to put me on a shelf in an admin position. So I'm going to have no downward influence. I'm not going to be able to do anything for any of the people that were under my command before, that people that I worked for, basically. Why am I even here? So I can eat shit from somebody who's, doesn't have the same value system that I do. And my wife was like, leave. You always had 20 years as a possibility for this reason. Now you can use it for this reason. So I did. I walked in, put in my papers, and said adios. And I was the smartest, best thing I could have done. I left on my own terms, not having compromised my ideals, and that was important to me. I'm glad that my wife was so supportive. I mean, it's a big thing to do. I mean, I was a captain at the time, and I mean, that'd be the equivalent of, a VP at a bank or something. I mean, you're doing pretty well financially, and there's a certain amount of status there and all that kind of stuff. But none of that was important to me compared to, what was really actually important, which was, being true to yourself and being true to the people that you're responsible for. If you're a leader, you're responsible for certain things. And anyway, that's kind of heavy stuff to get into right away. I didn't mean to go down that road, but
no worries, dude. No, that's good stuff.
Well, it made it good that I had done this, hey, it'd be cool to write at 20 years sort of thing. It kind of gave me an escape clause for a different reason than I had intended it. And it worked really well. And I'm glad that I was able to do it. I kind of had a neat sort of like landing pad that happened though. Right after I retired, I got a call from a buddy of mine who was teaching leadership, and he was like, "Hey, I know this is a passion of yours, and this pretty prestigious organization teaches this 3-week leadership course all across the US and Canada, and I think you'd be good at it. You want to come and take the course and then train to be an instructor, and you're interested?" And I was like, "Actually, yeah, I am." And so I actually did that for 4 years after I retired, went all over the country, all over Canada. And that was a cool experience because I got to see places and meet people that I never would have met before. And whatever wound I felt like I had when I left the job the way I did, it really helped heal that too. So when I finally hung up my PowerPoint clicker in 2017 and started focusing on writing full time, it was with a healed heart as well. So
yeah, that's pretty well. That way too. That wouldn't translate into your writing either. If you got that open wound like that, you think that would translate through the pen, right?
It really did. I mean, that's a very apt observation on your part because my flagship series is the River City series, and it's a thinly veiled Spokane, which is where I worked. And I had written the fourth installment of that in 2011, I think, is when it was published. And after, and I'd started but not finished the next installment because I got kind of distracted with other projects instead. And so I didn't end up writing the next River City book until 2018. And a big part of that was I couldn't go spend time in River City because it felt like I was spending time, where I kind of had my heart broken a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
So you're absolutely right. It totally translated. And, I've written 3 River City books since 2018. So as far as wounds being healed, I think we're good to go.
Backing up just a little bit, I remember my career, in the corporate world. There was a time. It was short lived, but it was pretty intense, to where I would end up being physically sick on Sunday, knowing that I got to go to work on Monday.
Yeah, the Sunday blues.
Oh, that was brutal, man. Whew, that was brutal. I'm like, but I got 15 years in, and I'm trying to sell myself on it. And fortunately enough, for my side of it, the person that was causing me that grief moved on. So I was like, whew, okay, now I can get along. But
you still left not too long after that, 3 years later.
Yeah. But like you said, I don't know if that really truly heals all the way. Now, now you're kind of disgruntled no matter what, because sure, did the leadership have my back? They did, but it still left a kind of taste in my mouth,
Yeah, that's too bad. I'm not disgruntled at all. The chief that was there that I didn't see eye to eye with had a very public ouster about 3 years after he got there, a couple of years after I left, and it wasn't pretty. And and the guy that became chief after him was an internal candidate that I knew well and had worked with side by side. We were both majors at the same time, and honestly, I don't live in Spokane anymore, so I don't see stuff on a day-to-day basis. But whenever I take a snapshot of what's going on in the city, I think I can fairly say that things seem to have settled down, and he seems to be doing a fantastic job, at least from the outside looking in. And so I don't really have any rancor or anything at all about the job or about the department or anything. I kind of do about the individual still, probably. I mean, I'd probably punch him in the mouth if I came across him, because he was that big of a tool. But it's unfortunate. But it really, when I went and taught leadership for 4 years afterwards, all it did is really drive home how incredibly important good leadership is. I mean, you make or break an organization based on the leadership. And talented people can overcome poor leadership if it's only poor to a small degree. But after it gets above misdemeanor poor, it sabotages all the good work that people are doing at the line. And then they get discouraged and they start not doing the good work, or they start, kind of just phoning it in. And I mean, there's just a trickle down effect in attitude and in performance and everything. And so It really drove that point home.
Now with the leadership thing, I got some questions on that kind of pinged me. Is that where you worked for a company and you went in to like big Fortune 500 companies and did courses like that, or you had open seminars and you advertised them and you got a theater and you filled it and you did it that way? Like, what type of...
It was kind of some closer to the first thing, but not exactly. The organization, and I spent a lot of time in Canada, so I end up going back and forth sometimes between Canadian pronunciations and American ones. So if I say process and then process, you know what's going on. But the organization that I was working for, well, technically I was an independent contractor, but it was their program. It was the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which is a nonprofit organization that it exists basically to assist law enforcement nationally and internationally in many different ways. And one of those ways is in training. And so they adopted this course called Leadership in Police Organizations that began its life as a West Point leadership course. It was LIO leadership. I can't remember what it stood for, but it was the West Point leadership course taught at West Point to West Point students. And it was developed by mostly by a general who was also a doctor named Howard Prince, who served in Vietnam, actually was shot down in Vietnam in his helicopter. And, he drew heavily on behavioral science, established behavioral science. So he didn't make this stuff up. He went and studied Skinner, and he brought that into the program. He went and studied these different concepts of equity and concepts of expectancy and concepts of bias and all these different, the transformational versus transactional leadership and all of these things. And he cobbled it together really in a fairly brilliant way, I think. In fact, it's a course that as you teach it, you see the brilliance of how it was assembled more and more. But he did it in a 3-week course. The first week is about the individual. The second week is about groups, and the third week is about the organization as a whole. And they did it kind of cool. You come in for a week, to the police department or law enforcement organization that hosts it. And it might be all their people. It might be some of their people and people from other organizations in the area. And you teach the first week, and then you go away and you come back next month and teach the second week.
Okay.
And then in the third week, it's usually about 36 students at a time, 6 groups of 6, and they do a project that they present in the last week. So part of the last week is that, and the projects are meant to explore and demonstrate, their command of the different concepts. But, it's designed for law enforcement, and the course is, but the concepts contained in it, it's just human behavior. It's just human, it's social human behavior. And so it applies to anything. You could apply it to absolutely anything.
But the thing is, though, in law enforcement, it's just amplified, right? But just because of volume of what you deal with.
Yeah, and the stakes a bit too. Like you can screw up in the corporate world and lose some money, and that might get you fired. But you have a bad day as a police officer, and maybe somebody dies, or maybe you kill someone by making bad judgment. And so the stakes really get amped up a bit when you're in a position like that. I mean, it's like an ER doc, right? You misdiagnose somebody, they could die. If you misdiagnose a computer program, there's a bug in your app. It's a big difference, right? And I'm not diminishing other people's work. Other people's work is important too. I'm just saying that the consequences of failure can have greater ramifications for certain jobs.
The other thing too, that is the consequences or the conclusion of said action is immediate, right? So I think that amplifies the impact of that conclusion, right? Because if like you take your example, if you're in the ER and you make a bad decision, person dies, that's immediate right in front of you. Sure, in a corporate setting, you make a bad decision and you lose millions of dollars. Well, that might take you 6-8 weeks to see the ramification of the said.
Right.
Sure. Is it not? Of course, it's not as bad as somebody dying, but I feel that the impact is greater because it's bam, right there in your face.
Right. Yeah, and it's usually of a visceral nature.
Yeah, right? Yeah. I was just going to say more of a violent nature. Yeah. But
for sure.
And that course in the second week, so it's 3 weeks. You come back for the second week, and you give them a project. So then you come back for the third week in a month, and they have to complete that project. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. There's usually 2 lessons a day, 2 4-hour blocks, all through the course, all the way into and including up till the second to the last or even last day, depending on different instructors kind of monkeyed around with the last several days a little bit schedule wise and shifted things. But essentially it's 2 lessons a day for each deal. And then in that third week, they make those presentations, and the way it's formatted is actually kind of smart too, because they're told, pick a real world problem that you have some either input to or control of or whatever, and bring it in here, because you're essentially workshopping it, and ideally you'll take it back out into the real world and apply it.
Sure.
So don't bring me a project that I'm going to end world hunger. That's a bit too broad. Bring something that's local, that is, if you want to have an impact on local hunger, that's tough. That's a hard one, but you could do it. More to the point, if you want to, affect the, you want to have a major impact on hunger in grade school kids, at the schools.
Yeah, narrow down,
right? Now put that in a police setting, a police problem that you're dealing with, a law enforcement problem, but that's kind of the range that you want to do something local, something that you can have an impact on. And often those projects were taken out, and a version of them, of course, they get worked on once they get into the real world. No plan survives contact with the enemy. But wait,
hold on a second. That's another version of saying the classic Mike Tyson phrase.
Yeah, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Say that. Yeah. What was that phrase you just said? Say that one again.
No plan survives contact with the enemy. It just means you can have a battle plan, you can have a plan of action, but as soon as you go to implement it, the real world kicks in, and you're going to have to adapt to what happens in the actual street level application. That's always been the big clash between academics and practitioners, and it's the same in law enforcement, but it happens in just about every profession. The academic would say that the practitioner, the street person, doesn't take into consideration all of these theories and all of these bits of knowledge that have been accumulated over time. And the practitioner on the street would say, well, all of your ideas work really good in the laboratory or in a classroom, but when the boots hit the ground, it doesn't work. And the fact is that they're both right. These ideas that and theories have an application on the street. It's just not a one-to-one application all the time.
100%. I just got a great example of that. I worked for Coca-Cola for 18 years, and we were in a sales training session, and that's what kind of spiked me about what you were talking about, and that's why I asked if you went to Fortune 500 and all that, because we had people come in to teach us, right? And this one guy goes, okay, you're going to go to Bob's Pizza and you're going to see Steve and you're going to sell him X whatever. How would you do that? And I go, shit, I got this. I raise my hand and I go, I put out my pitch, and they look at each other and they're like, that's incorrect. Like, what?
How many times have you sold with that pitch?
Yeah. I was like, okay. And he goes, actually the answer is, and he had to put it on the screen, and it was 4, 5, 6 syllable words, like 3 paragraphs. And I go, what? You're basically saying the same thing I am, but Steve over at Bob's Pizza, he's just going to completely shut you off if you go in and talk that narrative.
Yeah.
Right. So I completely agree what you're saying there.
That's the disconnect right there. You just encapsulated it perfectly. That's the disconnect.
But they both have an application.
Well, they're both right? They're both
absolutely.
right. They're just both too arrogant or too afraid of being wrong or too hard-headed or whatever you want to say. They're not listening to each other to find out that there's a middle ground. And that's something that we pushed a lot in that course was, here's the theory, here's how it works. When you go apply it, it's not going to be cookie cutter. You're going to have to adjust, because you're dealing with individual people and you're dealing with an environment that isn't a classroom environment. And so, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. I mean, when you
Yeah.
get punched in the face, you have to be ready to roll with it. You have to be
Yep.
ready to counterpunch.
Yeah.
And so that's just reality. But too often academics don't address that. And because they won't address it, too often practitioners completely dismiss valuable academic, material.
Mm-hmm. And then you got an academic that's not on the street, and you got a guy that's on the street that's not an academic.
Right.
So there's that big, like you're saying, there's that huge disconnect.
And that was a good course for bridging that. And that was really one of the goals, I think, that Howard Prince had when he was putting it together, was to bridge the practical and the academic in a way that maximized the value of both.
Yeah, I can. Oh man, I can see that. And then, so after 4 years of that, you just went completely right into writing.
Well, I've been writing, my whole life, but pretty seriously since 2004. But that was when I went full time. And part of it, there are two reasons I did that. One was I wasn't being productive enough on the writing front. I wanted to be more productive. But the personal side of it was I was traveling 2-3 weeks out of the month. And so I was just tired of being away from my wife. I mean, not everybody loves their wife, I guess, but I certainly do. And I like her too. And so
you stole my line, dude. I was going to say that. You like her too, right?
Yeah, I do. And so being away was tough. And I think we also are, when we're apart from each other, I think we kind of want it differently. Like when we're apart, it's hard for me to like call every night or whatever. That just makes me miss her more. But I think the reverse is true for her. She kind of liked to have it, mitigated the being apart, to have at least some contact every day. And so like if we were cut from the same cloth on that, it would have been a little easier. We could have just done it one way or the other. But and it built to a point where it's like, I feel healed from the pain of the retirement, the parts of the retirement that caused me some pain. And I've really, I feel like I've accomplished something with the organizations that I've worked with. I spent a lot of time in Western Canada, from Saskatchewan to BC and everywhere in between, the larger organizations there. And I love that. I loved Canadians. I loved working with them. And so I didn't feel like, I felt like I'd done my part, and couple that with missing her, and then looking at, how slowly my writing was progressing in terms of output, because I was tired. I mean, if you're traveling a lot, that's tiring. And if anyone who teaches knows that if you're doing it right, it is exhausting. It's exhausting
100%.
if you're putting the effort into it. So I just didn't have the energy for the writing. And so all that kind of came to a head. And I said, I think it's time. And I ended up putting it off for a little while, and kind of doing the slow, we are now descending for landing sort of thing, rather than jumping out with a parachute or anything. But I left on good terms. I really enjoyed my time there. I enjoyed the organization, the people, and the work. But I'm glad that I'm home all the time now. I mean, I've been home now for 4 straight years, and my output is better, and I'm 100% focused on what I'm focused on. So it's a good time.
Now, so did you always want to be a cop?
No, not really. I mean, it was one of the things I wanted to be when I was a kid, but it was like the earliest I can remember thinking of myself as something, I thought of myself as a writer. And cool. Then I learned, as you get a little bit older, the way the world works isn't that you go to some government agency and say, I'm a writer. And they say, here's your check, go write something. I mean, and then it just doesn't, so I realized, I'm going to have to like get a job, and this is going to have to be something I work at. And that happened in high school. I figured that out. I mean, I might have been the smartest kid around, but I picked up some stuff. And, I realized too that, my family wasn't the wealthiest family by any means. And, I was the oldest of 6 kids. And so I knew if I was going to go to college right away, I was going to be working my way through college. And And I didn't know what I wanted to do with college exactly. So I ended up joining the Army.
Mm.
Like about like December of my senior year, I signed up on the delayed entry program. And I did that for a couple of reasons, several actually. One was just that direction piece. I figured it would gave me time to figure that out. Another was there's a patriotic element to that. I mean, now maybe I saw Top Gun too many times that year. Could be. I mean, but or watched too many. An Officer and a Gentleman too many times, but
Oh,
um,
so
but there was a patriotic element to it. I felt like I want to serve my country, and
mhm,
that
that's
was
cool.
good. They also had the Army College Fund, which basically was going to pay for college. I mean, in a nutshell, the details are the details, but that's what it was going to do. And then I had a teacher in high school, my Spanish teacher, who's unfortunately passed on, Mrs. O'Halloran. She called herself La Bruja Vieja, which means the old witch. And she was anything but. I mean, she was a sweet woman. And I was pretty good at Spanish. I was pretty good at languages. And any teacher that has a student that's good at what they teach, they like that student, right?
Sure, sure.
And plus she's already a sweet person. So, that's like doubling down. And so she liked me. And she saw me talking to the recruiter, and the recruiter was trying to angle me into, I don't know, something I wouldn't have been good at, mechanic or something. And she walks by and she saw that, and she was pretty liberal. And so, I don't think she was too keen on the Army in general necessarily. Not like hating the Army, but it wasn't like her bag. And so she pulled me aside at lunch. I had her class right before lunch. She pulled me aside the next day and she said, "I saw you talking to the recruiter, and I'm not going to tell you not to go into the Army, but if you go into the Army, you tell him you want to go to the language school and you insist on it." And I was like, "Oh, I never even thought of that. That would be
Yeah,
cool."
yeah.
So I said, "Wow, thanks. That's a good idea." So I go back and I see my recruiter, Sam was his name, Sam the Sham. And
At the sham.
he's like, "Oh, I don't know, this mechanic thing's pretty good. It's a good gig." I'm like, "Well, I want to go to the language school." I don't know. It's really hard to get in. It's really hard to get in, and they don't take hardly anybody. I said, "Well," then I kind of then I got my back up a little bit,
Yeah,
because it's a
yeah.
challenge. It's a challenge, and I was like, "Well, my advisor told me that I need to do this." So he's like, "All right." So they scheduled me for this test, and this test, Walt, is the goofiest test you're ever going to take. It was called the D Lab, the Defense Language Aptitude Battery, and that's not the classified information or anything. I don't know if they have it anymore. This was in 1985.
What the where's battery come from?
Well, because it's a battery of tests. It was like about
Oh,
six
I see.
six
I see.
tests in one.
Oh, okay.
They took 6 parts of it or something. I don't know. I think it might have been over 2 sessions too. But you go in to take this test and they sit you down and they say, "Okay, welcome to the test. We're going to learn a new language, and it's all going to be based on English. So don't worry. You don't have to learn any new vocabulary." And they said about changing the rules of English and then seeing if you could keep up. And so they started easy by doing things like in Spanish, you don't say the White House, you say the house white. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
that's just the
sure.
way Spanish works. The
Right.
adjective follows the noun. So they said, adjective now follows the noun. So don't say I see Walt's white house. You see I see Walt's house white. And then boom, they go right into examples. The proper way to say I see Walt's white house is, and then they go, it's all audio, right? It's not in front of you on paper. You just have your answer key and you got to listen. And when you hear the right one, you choose it. And it's pretty easy at first because they're just making these little tweaks to English. And you're like, "Yeah, I got this knocked. This is stupid." And then they add one to it. And then they add another one to it. And then they add another one to it. And pretty soon you hear English words that make no sense by the time you're done because you're having to like process all these different rules. And it's actually kind of brilliant in retrospect because they're miming some of the Romance language rules, like that adjective change, like the conjugation of verbs, um, and so forth. And then they get into these the idea of um, cases, like you have the genitive case and the accusative case and the locative case and the vocative case and all these different cases that are grammatically based, where the word is in the sentence and the job that it's doing tells you what case it's in, and the cases have different endings depending on, and then those have to match up with the verb, or the verb can, or those have to match up with the adjectives and the adverbs, and maybe they even change the noun, and it's just it gets really confusing really fast, and so my head was spinning.
Dude, my head's spinning.
And it's a long test, and they give it to you in pieces, like 40-minute pieces, but it's like a 4-hour test or something. I don't remember. It was super grammar heavy. And then they did have one section that was pictograph kind of. They'd say, like, which picture best represents the sentence, the dog bit the man's leg? And then they give you these pictures that are, and I must have bombed those, because when I came back for aptitudes, none of the Asian or any of the languages that are pictograph heavy, I just wasn't even in the running for those. But the grammar intensive ones, I was, and that's essentially how I ended up with Czech, which is a very grammar intensive Slavic language that uses all of those cases that I mentioned. It conjugates verbs just like Spanish and all the Romance languages do, and it's it's basically a titch easier than Russian. Russian has one less case. It doesn't have the vocative case, I don't think. Maybe it does. I don't remember. Vocative is how the person's name will change if you're addressing them directly. So your name may be Walt, but if we had the vocative case in English, for example, when I speak directly to you, I would say, "Hey, Walto," or "Walte," or "Walta," or something like that. I mean, it depends on the language. It would be different than your name in the nominative case, which is just your name, Walt. And so they had that. But Russian also, of course, had the Cyrillic alphabet that you had to figure out, and that was an additional difficulty that Czech didn't have. It has a few extra letters, but they look like our letters. They just have some marks above them, so it wasn't that part wasn't tough.
Now, with this test, was that the idea behind it, to see what language that you could probably learn, maybe?
Yeah, it was to see if you had the aptitude to learn languages, period. And then it drilled down a little bit further to see where your aptitude lay. I mean, would you be good at learning Korean or Chinese? I would not. Or Vietnamese, which is tonal, where you can have the same word. You can say Walt, but if you say Walt, it's a different word. It means something different.
Wow.
And I'm not very musically gifted at all, so I would fail utterly at a language like that. But the grammar ones I excelled at, and so that's what the aptitude test is there for. So I take the test, and I can't remember the score I got, but it was like, when I would talk to other people who took the test, I was always like in the top third of people I talked to in terms of where I scored. Shit. So I did pretty well on it. And I must have done really well on the grammar parts, because I know I tanked the pictograph parts. So I was probably like 99 and 70 or 99 and 52 or something,
Yeah. So hey man, it's an average, right? You got to take the average out too.
Yeah. I think they weighted the grammar a little more heavily, but so my scores come back, and suddenly Sam is my best friend about this language school thing.
Hey, I found this guy, right?
Well, because there were a few jobs that required the language skill that were what they called critical MOSs, military occupation specialty. It's just the job designators for the Army. And they're critical, meaning they were in high demand. And, right. And so now he, as the recruiter, he gets like more credit for filling a critical position. Mm-hmm. So now, boom, I was in. So I ended up going into the Army and learning how to speak Czech down in Monterey, California, at the Presidio of Monterey for 15 months. And which was absolutely a wonderful experience, and it's a beautiful area. And And then spent 4 months in Texas doing the top secret parts of it, learning all the those pieces, and ended up going to Germany and spying on the Czechs for a few years.
Ah,
Um, which sounds a little sexier than it is. Basically,
boring, right?
you and me look exactly like I would, minus the beard and in uniform,
Gray hair, right?
pretty much the way I would have looked on position, because I was just listening to the radio transmissions that were, and spying on them, and there's a whole thing that goes into that, I mean, code words, call signs, and
Yeah, sure, sure, sure.
content of the transmission and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that was my job, was spying on the Czechs. And then 89 Velvet Revolution happens. And for those who aren't up on
I was going to
European
say,
history,
you got to explain that one.
basically, so when I went in, NATO, and the US and all the Western powers, and the Warsaw Pact, the Soviet Union, and all the Eastern Bloc countries were staring. That was the middle of the ring. Mike Tyson, Riddick Bowe stare down, right? I mean, it was still the Cold War in '86, but that was the period of time. Shortly after that, I think, or I can't remember exactly when Gorbachev came to power, but once he was in position, there was a little bit of a softening that happened in Eastern Europe and in the Soviet Union. And it happened in Eastern Europe first because they were satellite countries. So if you can imagine, you're Russia, what we said, but really we mean the Soviet Union when we say that, and you're trying to hold on to this little empire. It's like your union, and then your satellite countries that you kind of control, like Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Poland, Yugoslavia, all of these. If you're having a hard time keeping grip on things, what are you going to kind of let slip first? Your satellite countries is where it's going to slip first. And so it did. And the Czechs were always a very, they weren't hippies exactly, I wouldn't say, but they were always very, very freedom oriented people, and did not do very well under the yoke of the Eastern Bloc, setup. And so they essentially had a peaceful uprising and threw off the Soviet rule, and garnered their own. They elected a poet as president, and they became a free country. And so by like 89, I mean, we weren't even spying on them anymore. I mean, when we went down to the Gulf for Operation Desert Storm, the Czechs sent down a nuclear biological chemical team as part of the coalition. That's how far they came in that brief period of time. And then right on the tail of that, like less than a year later, the Berlin Wall comes down. I mean, so, well, actually, the Berlin Wall came down first, and then the Velvet Revolution, maybe. It's been a while now to go back and think about the order of events, because I'm trying to think where I was when each one happened, and I think one predated the other. I think the wall may have predated the revolution, but either way, it was obviously the end of the Cold War. It was a glorious time to have a bird's eye view of it. I mean, we were 12 hours ahead of CNN at best.
And were you over there in Europe at the time, or were you here?
Yeah. No, I was in southern Germany. I was in a town there outside of Munich, a town called Augsburg, which actually a very important historical city for a variety of reasons. But it was just cool. I mean, like I said, we were very, very few hours ahead of CNN as things changed and occurred. And I think, put it this way: while I went over there as a U.S. soldier in military intelligence with a top secret security clearance to spy on the radio transmissions of the Czech army, with the expectation that they were probably helping drive T-72 tanks through the Fulda Gap to attack West Germany, right?
Yeah, sure.
I got out of this. I got held over a little bit for Desert Storm, but after I got out in March of '91, I drove my Nissan Sentra with U.S. Army plates on it across the border into the Czech Republic and went to the city of Polzin and stayed there and visited for a couple of days before I flew back home. So that's a pretty big
Ooh.
change of events if you think about it.
In a short period of time.
Very short period of time.
Yeah.
Very short. 3 years.
Yeah, yeah. Where did Velvet Revolution come from? Where did the name come from? Is there a story behind that?
You know, I am sure there is. I don't know who coined the phrase. What it means, though, is that it was a peaceful revolution. There were protests and so forth, but the Czechs, like I said, had an interesting history with the Soviets, and a lot of people may remember their history and know that in 1968 they tried to do the same thing and leave the Warsaw Pact and be free of the Soviet control. And the Soviets said, "Oh, no, that's not happening." And they rolled their tanks in. And now that was called the Prague Spring, and it started out much the same way, but then the Soviets rolled in the tanks and put an end to that. And so this was a very cool thing to happen because it worked out the way people hoped the Prague Spring would work out.
And for you to have a front row seat, basically, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's cool, man. Be part of history like that. Now, do you still?
In a small way.
You still speak it?
Yes, but I love language. I mean, as a writer, I love English, and then I love language in terms of learning other languages. But language is a perishable skill, and
absolutely.
I just haven't had the chance to speak to a lot of Czechs in the last when I got out in '91. So what is that now? 30 years.
Sure.
But so it does decline to it's not because I knew it. I tested at the same level as a native speaker with a high school education when I got done with school. So if you start there, I'm never going to drop below, wow, this tourist can speak pretty good Czech. I'm never going to get below that level.
Well, I was going to say, if you went over there now, you could find the bathroom.
Oh, if I went over there now for a couple of weeks, I could have a decent conversation.
Yeah, that's cool.
I don't think I could have this conversation. Well, I could, but I would sound like a foreigner trying to speak the language.
Sure.
I'd say things funny and I'd still be thinking in English and translating it to Czech in my head. Whereas when you get to a certain point of fluency with the language, you think in that language. The words that you're going to speak form as words in that language. That's when you're fluent. And I haven't had that in any of the languages that I've dabbled in a long time because I unfortunately haven't had the opportunity to use a lot of them.
Right. Well, I was going to ask you, do you speak any other languages?
I hesitate to say speak because again, it's a level of proficiency.
Right.
That to me is a high. If I say I speak that kind of means I'm proficient. But I did pick up a lot of German when I was over there. I lived there for 2.5 years, so my German's probably almost as good as my Czech. And I had Spanish from high school, and I've kept up on that. And then I took a little Russian when I got back when I was going to school. After I joined the police department and I was working in Spokane there for a few years, I went back to school to use that Army College Fund, and the department had a tuition reimbursement program where if you took courses that they deemed useful for your work, they would reimburse you the cost of them. Cool. And Russian, we had a pretty good Russian population there in Spokane at the time, as a growing Russian population. So I took some Russian courses there, and the department paid for it, which was great. And it resulted in a few funny exchanges. I
was going to say Spokane is not where I would think that a Russian population would be.
You'd be surprised though, because what ends up happening with any of these groups that come over is it just takes a small number of folks to kind of get a good anchor point in a location, and then people they go there because they have a landing pad. They have somebody that
Yeah.
can get them started. I mean, I found out that there's a huge Czech population in Houston, and in some town is it in Milwaukee or Madison or something like that too. And it's where people landed and then, started accumulating because there were people who spoke their language there.
Yeah, I was going to say just kind of that sense of community, right? It adds up really fast.
And it wasn't, I say Russian, and that's almost, I wouldn't say a racist thing to say, but that's a very generalist thing to say. We actually had a pretty large Ukrainian population. And I discovered most of the people that were referred to by locals as, Russians, when you actually talk to them, many were from the Ukraine or from
Oh, okay.
Belarus.
Yeah.
And which had their, they speak Russian a little differently. So it was
Yeah,
an
I was just
interesting
gonna
transition
say.
there.
But then at the time when you were in the military, were you writing there as well? Did you have a
Yeah. Yeah. I wasn't publishing much. I think my first short story was published right shortly before I got out of the military. Well, the first short story I ever got paid for, I might have had something sooner. But much like I was not really sure what I wanted to do career wise, I was a little bit floundering around writing wise in that I didn't know for sure what I wanted to write. So I was writing some fantasy because I grew up on fantasy and science fiction and I loved it. I was writing some like tough PI stuff a little bit. I was writing just different. I mean, I didn't have a genre that really stuck, and so I don't know that I made as much progress as I might have otherwise made if I had, really really focused. I took a back then they called them correspondence courses. It'd be like an online course, but through the mail.
yeah, yeah.
And I had a cool guy, a cool teacher who, it was my first experience of getting work back that was like edited by somebody who both wanted you to be better and was also secondarily more than willing to tell you where you sucked
So
and what and
mhm.
what and what needs to be. And so he was really good about that.
So wait a minute on that. You would like write something. So say you were going to be putting a 10 chapter book together. You would write a chapter and you'd send it in the mail, correspond it, and they'd edit it and bring it and send it back.
Not exactly. It was a course, so they would say, like, here's the exercise. You need to write a 1,000 word short story that deals with family or something
Okay.
that general. And then you'd write it. And then when you got to the nearer to the end of the course, then they're saying, okay, for the rest of this course, you're going to write a short story, but we're going to add these different elements to it. So you can write it in any genre you want, but we're going to focus on these different parts. We're going to focus on character. We're going to focus on pacing. We're going to focus on dialogue. We're going to focus on whatever and move the story along as well. So write the first part of your story and then,
Sure.
it would come back revised and you fix it and then move forward with it. And then you get to the end of the story and hopefully you've got something you could, send off for.
So you had this passion of writing, but then you wanted to take a course to actually learn how to do it correctly.
Well, yeah, I've always equated writing to music in that, like music, some people have natural talent when it comes to putting language together, or they have an ear for dialogue, or they are great at describing things and so forth. But I don't think Joe Walsh picked up the guitar and said, "Oh," and then suddenly played Rocky Mountain Way. I mean,
Yeah.
I think he had a guitar instructor, or he watched Monkey See, Monkey Do to learn, or he at least fiddled with it a lot. So I guess what I'm talking about is the difference between talent and craft,
Mm.
and I felt like I had some talent, but I needed to learn craft, and so I started trying to teach myself or get taught craft. And I took a creative writing course when I was in Monterey because that was largely kind of a day shift ish sort of situation. I was able to take courses in the evening without running into too much trouble with the Army schedule there. And that was great. I learned a lot there too. But writing, like any career, particularly an artistic one, it's a journey.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, I mean, that would be, take this project for an example. I mean, sure, I like your thing between talent and craft. Right, there's a lot of things I didn't have a fucking clue about when I started, right. And then you learn as you go along.
Yeah, but the ability to talk to people, the ability to listen to people, the ability to comprehend what they're talking about and reflect it back to them with your own element added to it, some of that's craft, but most of that comes from natural talent. I mean, putting together a podcast that's edited and, knowing how to kind of help nudge a guest, off of a boring topic, and this kind of stuff. Yeah, that some of that's craft, and certainly the editing of it and all that is craft. And, I think sometimes people conflate the two when it comes to certain artistic endeavors, and eventually they do. I mean, eventually you become one like kind of blob of artistic being, but that's when you become master level stuff, I think.
Yeah,
and until then, we're all still, trusting our talent and honing it with our craft, and it's a never ending journey for the most part. Even the masters, I mean, they're still working on it. I mean, I'm a big hockey fan, and I can tell you with no doubt in my mind, the biggest stars who are the most talented players in the league are the hardest workers too.
100%. Oh, dude, that's a subject I'll go down a rabbit hole or stand on a soapbox, however you want to talk about it. But the people that put that kind of, well, how do they get to that point?
Right, because they were working that hard. They were taking their talent and they were harnessing it, and they were applying it, and they were learning their craft, because whatever you're doing, there is a craft to it.
And they put all their effort into that one thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're very single-minded, which I haven't been until recently, I mean, until I retired, and even more recently kind of rededicated myself and to be even more focused. But, I mean, it's hard when you're, people have a career. And so some of the things they're passionate about, hey, I can only play music on the weekends type of thing, and so they don't become the guitarist they could be or whatever. But yeah, the people who become the superstars and the masters are very, very single-minded about it, I think.
Yeah, you'd have to be. I mean, that, like you just made a great point. Wayne Gretzky, we'll just throw a name out that most people should probably ought to know.
Non-hockey players know that name, so you're in good company.
Yeah, that's, I try to put it out to the masses. But like Wayne Gretzky, if he worked a 40-hour a week job and played in a bar league at night on the weekends, would he ever been Wayne Gretzky that we know of course, right? No,
he would have been the best player in the bar in the beer league, but yeah, he wouldn't have scored 1,000 points more than the next guy in history, or whatever.
Yeah, and then he skipped, or decided to practice hockey instead of going with his family or going out with the guys or going out with the girls or going on a date. He said, no, I'm going to play hockey because this is what I want to do. And that's why you get to that point, so
yeah,
I agree with you. And then in your case, take your case for an example, you decided, hey man, I want writing. This is what I want to do. This is all I want to do. And I assume, and we'll get into it here in a second, is once you started full-time and that's all you did, how much faster did that accelerate compared to when you were doing it part-time when you were an officer?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what you would expect. I mean, and I look back over the last 4 years and I see times where in my current state of mind, I would say I was being lazy there. I was not appreciating this opportunity of being retired and having a retirement income,
Mhm.
having a wife who is working full time as a teacher and is providing income and healthcare coverage,
And support.
and and is my number one fan and number one critic, is willing to be the number one critic as well, which is
Oh,
invaluable.
yeah.
And, and some days I was dicking off when I shouldn't have been. I mean, some days I was, and so I've corrected that course. It's not a problem anymore. And it wasn't like I was laying around peering at my navel or something, but I could have been more productive. And now I am. Um, but,
Do you,
writing, go ahead. Sorry.
oh, but do you keep like a schedule?
I
Like
do
you,
now.
okay.
I used to be a little more willy nilly about it. And that was because when I was working, I had to steal time where I could. I couldn't be on a set schedule. There's just too many variables.
Sure. Sure.
The job itself, a lot of the jobs I was in when I was working on the job were not rigid in their time. So I wouldn't always get home at the same time, or I wouldn't go in at the same time, and so forth. And unexpected overtime, and incidents happening that are totally unplanned. You can't plan
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
those kinds of things. And then add to that on the personal side, for a period of time I was divorced, and so my kids would be with me or not. So I mean, I'm not going to go hide myself away in the study during the period of time when my kids are there, unless they're in bed sleeping.
Right. Yeah.
And so I was a time stealer, for writing. And sometimes I wouldn't get a chance to do it, except, oh, I'm off this day. The kids have gone back to their moms. I don't have to go to work until tomorrow afternoon. Now I have 8 hours, and I'm going to write the whole 8 hours. And so then I write in a block, and it worked for me. And I was fairly prolific given what else I was doing, but it also created a pretty bad habit for me when you translate it to the situation I'm in now, which is since 2017, I'm at home, I'm retired, and this is my job. And I think I'm gonna go, play on my PS4 for a little while,
Yeah.
and take a break, and then 4 hours later, I'm like, oh, I better go do. Well, that's not disciplined, and so I've had to correct that course because it no longer applies. It's a typical situation, Walt, of where you have a way of doing things that fits the what you're faced with and what you're dealing with, and then
Hmm.
that changes, but you keep doing things the old way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
For sure.
I mean, corporations are replete
Notorious
with
for
that. This is the way we've always done it. And
that.
I was kind of doing that to myself a little bit, to a degree, and I had to kind of take stock and say, no, if you want to be successful at the level that you're striving for, here's how you have to do it. And so now I'm up at 5 every morning, and I'm pumping out a word count, and I'm working
Oh,
on things in the evening, and so forth. And I'm not a bad boss. I'm okay with myself. If I mean, I don't, I can take a break. I can go take a walk. I can do, I mean, I'm not standing over myself, self-flagellating or anything, like get working, but I'm just a lot more disciplined about it. And it definitely makes a difference. I've seen the difference.
well, so
It's night and day.
as your boss, how was your last review? It was pretty good.
Well, no, it wasn't very good. That's why we've changed and shifted
Well,
gears. You
I was
know?
gonna ask you about you mentioned word count. So my question was going to be, do you say, okay, from 6 to 10, or do you say, hey, I'm going to start at 6 and I'm going to put 1,000 words down, or 10,000 words, or whatever?
Yeah, I've done both ways. What I set for myself here more recently was 5,000 words a day, Monday through Friday.
Hmm.
And I'm up at 5, coffee, checking email a little bit, watching a little YouTube, reading a little hockey news, get my brain awake, and working by 6, and then going from there. And if I break that, whenever I break it and I'm still rolling, I keep rolling. If I'm exhausted and at that point, then I'll shift gears to something else. When you are running your own writing business, which is essentially what you're doing if you're independently published, if you publish your own work, then there's always something else you need to be doing.
Sure.
But not all of it takes the same level of creative juice. And so, a good buddy of mine that I co-authored, 6 books with now, Colin Conway is his name. He was hitting on me pretty hard about this 6-8 months ago, about how, pay yourself first. Use that creative energy on your own work, and then get to the things that don't require as much of it later on. And give yourself the best of yourself, basically. And he's right. And I started doing that quite a while ago, and I've redoubled my efforts in the last month or so.
That's cool.
So that's kind of how I go about it. I'll tell you this though, Walt, and you probably can say the same thing about podcasting. So you may have experienced this. Writing is one of those things, and I think podcasting probably is too, that people think is easy. And they vastly overestimate their own ability to do so. And that sounds arrogant. I don't mean it to be arrogant. Because people may have a great deal of talent, but they haven't invested the time in the craft. And so they overestimate where their work is in terms of professional quality. So it is interesting to me. Sometimes you run into people who kind of poo-poo what you're doing a little bit, and it's kind of like hockey in a way. I mean, I see people yelling at hockey players from the stands about how they suck, and I'm like, when have you ever strapped on skates? I mean, it's harder than you look. Go give it a try, buddy. It's tough, And
there was this guy, a comedian. I thought it was a great skit. He said for the Olympics, they should have a pink lane. So what they do is, so you got an 800-meter dash, right? Or run, whatever they call it. We'll say dash. They just randomly pick somebody from the crowd to run in the pink lane to give you a perspective on how fast these people really go, you know?
Yeah. It's pretty amazing. If you've tried something and then, I mean, it's this way when I read some of the really stellar writers' work. It's this way having played recreational hockey when I watched the professionals play, and then when you watch them in person as opposed to television, it's a whole other level. You gain an appreciation for how talented these folks are. I'm not trying to toot my own horn at all by when I'm referring to my writing. All I'm saying is that I have encountered people who don't take it very seriously because they think it's easy, and it's not easy to be professional at it and to do a good job. It's I'm not saying it's not fun, and it may be easier for some people than I find it, but it is a talent and a craft, not just potential.
100%, and guys, ladies too, but I just say guys, they start a podcast and 3 episodes in, they're like, how come I'm not Joe Rogan? And you're like, dude, you got to, and they're like, I'm not making any money. I'm like, you got 3 20-minute episodes. Is it anybody even
with lousy sound quality and no editing and no theme song and none of the different things that you can do to make it more of a professional broadcast.
Yeah, and it just cracks me up, like you said, and good for them, because that's where I started, man. My first 10 episodes or even more, they're horrible, dude. But I was having a good time. People were having a good time, and I still have such a good time, And what I benefit from is this exactly. You and I are talking, dude. I would have never met you.
True, very true.
So it just opens the world up to meet interesting people, and I like hanging out and some of the stuff you've been talking about, man. It's so much fun. But going back to hockey, I always say hockey is more fun to watch in person, and football is more fun to watch on TV.
Yeah, and I would never have known if you were right or not until very recently, because I'd never been to a football game, professional football game.
Mhm.
Um, and then my brother-in-law, who is notoriously a saver, um, spent some serious cash to buy some awesome tickets to the Las Vegas Raiders game against. It was the one they played San Diego about a month or so ago,
God damn, that's a
and
big game.
it was a great game, and we had these seats that were basically like lazy boy seats, and so they were awesome seats. And like you walk back into the main area, and there's food that you can just get. I mean, the only thing that
Oh,
wasn't free was the drinks. You had to buy your own alcohol if you wanted any. But I mean, and the view, the sight lines were awesome, and it was really fun to watch the game. But yeah, I think football probably you get more out of it with all the TV angles and the analysis.
mhm.
Whereas hockey, you
Oh,
get the speed of the game far more in person. If I was going to try to make somebody a hockey fan, I'd take them to any game, a
I know.
junior game, a pee-wee game, kids game, even
Yeah,
before I, get them to love the game live, and then they'll watch it on TV because they can't
right.
go to every game live. But when I lived in
No,
Spokane, we were season ticket holders a couple of years for the local team there, the Spokane Chiefs, a junior team, WHL team. And even when I wasn't a season ticket holder, I'd still go to two dozen games a year, and it's just because live is so much better.
so much better. And the thing is, if you want to step up the live game, go to like a college level or even high school because they play. To me, they just play so much harder, and they're
Yeah.
wanting to prove a point, so they're just
Mhm.
out there killing it. Oh,
Yeah,
hockey's
that's the way it was for juniors, for
Mhm.
they're 16 to 20-year-olds, and there's some of them are playing to get noticed for the draft, and some of them are playing so that the team that drafted them will sign them, and some of them are playing so they can walk on for a tryout, and
Yeah,
so
yeah,
and they're kids, so they're, I mean, they're still young. I mean, even 20 to me, that's still a kid.
no, yeah.
And
That's still.
it's a ton of fun. I have been to a few NHL games now,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
that same weekend that we saw the Raiders game, um, we went to the Vegas Golden Knights game that was in town, the
Ooh,
Chicago Blackhawks, and they put on a really good show. I'd say I mean, I went to a couple of games in Pittsburgh, and my beloved Flyers came into town and kicked their asses once. That was great. And we've been to Nashville, and up until I went to the Vegas game, Nashville was the best like crowd performance experience, like that
mhm,
part of it.
mhm.
But Vegas was at least as good, maybe even better. It
Yeah,
was pretty cool.
the Devils here do an unbelievable job. It's
Really.
yeah, it's a they
It's
do.
it's a shame there's only 10 people in the arena.
No, they give away tickets, man.
I know, I
They
know.
fill it in. But hey, one thing about your detective novel, you know what got me? I
Which
I
one?
was it River City? Hold on. Oh shit, did I? Dirty Little Town? No.
Oh,
So
yeah, yeah, that's the most recent one.
okay.
Uh,
River City book. Yeah, River City. That's what I thought.
yeah,
River City.
that's the name of the series, right?
Yeah. I just assumed that the main character was a dude. Is it
Okay,
Kate?
yeah,
Is it Kate?
Katie. Yeah, no, that's not a dude at all.
Yeah. But the
She
thing
is not a dude.
but the thing is, it was neat to recognize that I'm, going through reading your stuff, reading about it, and I'm just assuming before I read that it was Katie that the main character is a man, right? Because everything that I read, the main character is a man. So I just thought that was cool, man. And I was going to ask you what made, what idea or what rolled around in your head to make it to have it a woman.
It happened. I mean, this is going to sound super pretentious, but it's kind of true, and that is that she kind of made it happen. And initially when I wrote the first book, I thought the hero of the series was going to be this young officer, 3 years on the job. His name was Stefan Kopriva. He's a hot shot, kind of hard charger, and I thought he was going to be the hero. And I had a veteran cop who was one of the only characters based on a real person who was going to be the steady veteran to show the way, Thomas Chisholm. And those were kind of the two main people that were going to get the most screen time. And in the first draft of that, there were two female characters. One who was a love interest for Kopriva, and then another officer who she had kind of a subplot, kind of a mini arc through the book. And I realized, you know what? That's just, there's too many. One of the criticisms, and it's criticism even of the finished draft now, is that there's a lot of characters, and sometimes people have a hard time keeping track of them. And that was especially true in the early drafts of the first book. And so I started looking at, okay, what characters can I cut and give this scene to this guy without it mattering? I mean, I don't need to create a new character for that. Geo can do that, or whatever. And then I realized that both of these female characters, neither one of them was quite a complete fleshed out character on her own. And ultimately I kind of combined the two storylines and kept Katie instead of Aaron as the name. And so she had this secondary role in the first book. Then the second book rolls around. She still has a secondary role, although a little bit bigger one. She goes through a terrible, terrible incident halfway through the book, an unimaginable kind of a Kobayashi Maru situation. And if you know Star Trek at all, and it doesn't, and she fails just like everybody does.
I was just going to say, nobody passes, right?
She did not pass either, and she tried. She did everything she could, and so she was devastated by it. Well, shortly later in the book, Kopriva commits an even worse mistake with similar results, and so he's all caught up in his own angst, and he ends up leaving the job. Spoiler alert. And so by the time the third book rolled around, my main character, I'd somehow decided he was off the job at the end of the second book, and I'm like, holy shit. And so I started exploring this third book, and I realized the most interesting character and the one who had the most interesting things to do was Katie. And so in the third book, Beneath the Weeping Sky, which is about a serial rapist who's working in River City and becoming progressively more violent. She kind of becomes not even the first among equals. She definitely becomes the main character, and then there's a second tier of about 4 or 5 other characters, but she's the main character. And the thing about it the thing about Katie that I think captured my attention was that she is, when you're in her head, you see her vulnerability, you see her fears, you see her concerns, you see her weaknesses, you see her difficulties, and she's not afraid to admit them to herself. And yet when things happen, when she has to perform, when she has to rise to the occasion, she does. She is brave. She is courageous. She is willing to do what needs to be done. And so that combination of that vulnerability and that tenacious courage that she has just kind of made me fall in love with her as a character.
Oh, that's cool.
And so she kind of stayed, essentially she's remained the core of the series all the way through, from the third one to the 7th one, and the 8th one will be focused on her very closely. So it'll be, 6 out of 8 that she's kind of the main character so far.
Now, I have history. My mom got me into actually reading, and I call it kind of bubblegum reading. And it's light reading like Lee Childs and Balducci and CJ Box, that kind of those guys.
Good stuff. It's good stuff.
Yeah. Is that I don't know how to using the word compare. I don't know if that's the correct way to do that, but like, how would you sit in that if somebody like me likes to read Lee Child's and C.J. Box? Is that along because they're gritty crime novels, right? They're
Mhm.
like true
Yeah.
crime, right? Or not true crime, but fiction.
Yeah, I think a lot of my stuff would be in your wheelhouse if that's what you
Okay.
like to read. If you like Joseph Wambaugh when some of his work, or Webb Griffin's Badge of Honor series, that's something that I think River City compares to. Ed McBain's 87th Precinct has been a touchstone that some readers have pointed to for the River City series.
Okay.
But some of my other work is closer to some of that Lee Child, CJ Box sort of stuff. Um,
Yeah,
I mean,
just trying to give people an idea, and where it kind of sits.
yeah. But it depends on what you're looking for. Like if you're looking for that, I want to find out what the cops are thinking and doing, and I want more than one character that I get to know, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
That's River City. The cops are the good guys. They're not perfect. They usually win, but not always, and never without a cost, never without paying a price. But the thrust of that series is looking at them as human good guys for the most part.
Oh, that's cool.
Um, the Copriva mystery series, there's three of those as a spinoff. That's more of your disgraced cop doing unlicensed PI work, who done it, kind of gritty whodunits. Think maybe like Matt Scudder, the Lawrence Block books to a degree, maybe, and that sort of thing. And then there's some that are more, hard boiled. My Spoke Compton series, that's where the bad guys are on display, and I'm not necessarily saying the cops are dirty and bad in those books, but they're the bad guys as far as the people who we're following are concerned.
Okay.
And so the third one in that series is coming out here in March, and that's kind of fun to write because it's totally different. I mean, I'm writing characters that are nothing like people I knew on the job,
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
forth. So that's kind of fun. And
Now, you think about going audio?
uh,
You do audio?
yeah, a number of my books are in audio. Not all of them have been produced. But I would say half of them probably are on audio. The River City series is produced by a company in Spokane that's been around for a long time called Books in Motion, and
Mm-hmm.
they've done the entire series. A guy named Michael Bowen is the narrator that has done all six of the books. They're working on the seventh one now, and so he's literally the voice of River City, and I dig him. He's got this Peter Coyote sort of um, sound to him. I mean, it's not sound alike, but he's got that quality, and
Fits the part, right?
it fits the books perfectly.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they also took on the series that I wrote with my buddy Colin Conway called the Charlie 316 series, which is, River City is a thinly veiled Spokane. Charlie 316 takes place in Spokane.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a police procedural series as well, where everybody's got a little bit of dirt on them of some kind or another.
Uh,
There's some things going on. It's not The Shield or anything like that, but it's a very realistic look at how things are going on in a city where there's an officer involved shooting that is a little questionable, and so uh, Books in Motion picked that series up too. I actually just got through listening to the third book in that series, Badge Heavy, which might be my favorite of the series. And the guy Damon Abdallah, who is the narrator for that series, just like Michael is with River City, he is the perfect voice
that's
for Charlie 316. And I mean, I may never see my books produced on television or in the movies, and so listening to a talented narrator perform the work that I've done and that my buddy Colin and I have done, and like nailing it like Damien did, nailing it like Michael does, is probably the closest I'm going to get. And I mean, I don't sit down and read my own work when I'm done working on it. I don't pick it up for pleasure, but I do give a listen to the books when they're first produced. And I actually enjoy it because of the narrator's performance. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it brings them to life. It's amazing what they do.
It's amazing is a good word. Well, it really is, because in some instances, both of these narrators that I mentioned have voiced characters exactly the way I heard them in my head when I wrote them.
That's awesome.
And you can't do better than that.
No.
You cannot. I mean, that's a home run, on the first pitch. If you're able to nail that as so, either one of those guys, I'd highly recommend to anybody out there. They and Books in Motion does a great job with their packaging and distribution and so forth. So
yeah, I got Audible is the next town over from me, so I see they're building all the time right there in Newark. But we got to close this down, my friend.
Bummer.
I know, right? I got a pile of other stuff I would like to ask you, but I like to keep this about 90 minutes tops for
all right
that are people that
you can rapid fire me and I'll give short answers if you want to cover some of that stuff.
Yeah, no, it's all. But what the biggest thing is, man, I'm going to have like your website and Instagram, obviously, and all that good stuff on links in the show notes. Is that the best place to find you, is your website?
Yeah, I think, the frankzafiro.com website is a great place. If you go to Amazon, I have an author page there. Pretty much whatever you use, I have something there. If you're a Facebook or if you're a Twitter person or, BookBub even, places like that, you can find me there and follow. And I have a newsletter too. And so that you get some free stuff once in a while and inside info, and occasionally I'll do things like, which cover should I use, and just send it only to my newsletter people and things like that. So
that's cool. And your podcast, we're gonna cover that in the future, because I think that we're gonna go quite a long time talking about that.
Cool.
All right, dude. It was an absolute pleasure having you on, man.
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'll let you know when it comes out and all that good stuff. But we're going to shut it down, and we'll catch you on the flip side, boo. Thanks.
Thank you.
Whew, man, did I tell you that guy's got some stories? Frank's a good dude, man. Reach out to him. All the links are in the show notes. You know the drill. Follow him on Instagram and check out his website, all that good stuff. I'm going to get you out of here because I know you got shit to do. But don't forget, liverishi.com. Use the code word table50. And you're looking at 50% off your entire order, and showing you some love for showing me some love. And also my website, waltzkitchentable.com. Would love for you to sign up for the newsletter. Get a little sunshine in your inbox once a month. All right, man. Remember, when I say have a great day, the motherfucker is silent. Till next time.